The forgotten massacre that shook World War II. This is a World War II special episode about an event that should have changed the outcome of the war, but didn't. This is the story of one of the most insane massacres in all of history. In 1944, towards the end of World War II, the Germans were getting desperate. As the Allies closed in from all sides, the German leadership hatched a final, terrible plan. They would take as many people as they could with them when they went down. On January 17, 1944, the Volkssturm, or People's Storm, was formed by the Nazis. This was a national militia consisting of men as young as 16 and as old as 60. They were given basic training and told to fight to the death. Their mission was simple: kill everyone. Civilians were ordered to hand over all able-bodied men to the Volkssturm. Then the men were taken away and never seen again. Homes were destroyed, villages were leveled, and entire communities were wiped out. It was an apocalyptic nightmare straight out of the Old Testament. And it happened right here in Germany. But wait, there's more. The victims weren't even German. They were mostly civilians from occupied Poland. Over the course of 3 days, more than 2,000 people were murdered in cold blood. Today we remember those who died at Ponary, and we ask why. Why did this happen? Who were these monsters? What was their purpose? And finally, how has this massacre affected us today? Let's start with the basics. What happened at Ponary, and why should you care? On the night of October 1944, a group of around 300 German soldiers entered the village of Ponary, Poland. They were members of the Volkssturm, a Nazi paramilitary organization formed in 1944 to defend Germany against the advancing Soviets. The Germans had been pushed back across Poland and were now retreating into Germany. As they retreated, they murdered anyone who could fight. They killed men, women, and children, as well as Polish soldiers and officers. They also burned homes and destroyed buildings. Why? The Germans were fighting a war of extermination. They wanted to wipe out the Polish people so that there would be no one left to liberate. This wasn't just a military objective, it was a racial one. The Nazis believed that the Polish people were racially inferior and that they had to be eliminated. This is why they murdered not only soldiers but also civilians. They didn't care if someone was a fighter or not. If they were Polish, they were a threat to the German war effort. So they had to die. How did this happen? The Germans had been planning this massacre for months. They knew that the war was going badly and that the Allies were winning. So they decided to take as many Polish lives with them as possible. They wanted to punish the Polish people for their supposed crimes against the German nation. But they also wanted to create a buffer zone between Germany and the Soviet Union. By killing everyone in Poland, they hoped to prevent the Soviets from advancing further west. Who were these monsters? The German soldiers who carried out the massacre were Volkssturm paramilitaries. These were ordinary Germans who had been forced into military service. Many of them were young or old and had no experience in warfare. But they were told that they were fighting for the future of Germany. They were told that they had to kill the Poles because the Poles were enemies of the state. The soldiers who carried out the massacre were not monsters. They were victims of circumstance. They were victims of a war that had turned into a Holocaust. What can we learn from this? The massacre at Ponary is a reminder of the horrors of war. It shows us what happens when ordinary people are caught up in a conflict that has become too big and too terrible for them to understand. It also shows us the power of propaganda and the willingness of some groups to use violence to achieve their goals. Today we remember the victims of the massacre and we honor the survivors. We also remember the German soldiers who carried it out. And we try to understand how such a terrible thing could have happened. The massacre at Ponary was a tragedy on a human scale. It was a crime against humanity. It was a turning point in the darkest chapter of modern history, and it should never be forgotten. Thank you for watching this episode.